Dave Alden. I'm the chair of Urban Chat. We're thrilled to have all of you here. For those who may not be as familiar with Urban Chat as the regular attendees, we have a very simple set of goals: adequate housing, mobility alternatives, climate action, and solid municipal finances. Plus, not really a goal, but sort of an add-on to that is we insist on solutions that integrate those. You can't fix those kind of problems one at a time. They have to be integrated solutions to really make sense. I often welcome dignitaries. I find that hard to figure out who the dignitaries are on Zoom. It's hard to not miss a name, but I know I see council members. Thank you. I see the mayor. I think I saw a planning commissioner or two. I saw Deb Fox here from the city, perhaps someone else. And I think most of the Urban Chat board is here. So thanks to all of you. Upcoming events. We have our monthly lunch will be tomorrow at Aqua's Cafe. I'm guessing the content this evening will be a good part of the conversation. If you are free, please come join us. It's a very congenial but activist group. Our next Know Before You Grow will be 3 weeks from tonight. We will continue the conversation we began 2 weeks ago regarding strong towns. Specifically looking at some of the videos from Not Just Bikes and then talking about how the messages that Not Just Bike tells us about strong towns can be applied to Petaluma. Last time we did this, it was a great conversation. Some people who wouldn't normally be in the room, but they joined in, asked some good questions. The council was very active in replying to them. It was one of the better events we've done, at least for the conversation. So hopefully 3 weeks from tonight, we will continue that. Our speaker tonight, Ryan Short. He's an author from Salida, Colorado. I heard you pronounce it differently than I had, so I've now fixed my pronunciation. Thank you. I recently was given a copy of his book. We were just mentioning strong towns. I guess because I'm one of the early strong town members, we are one of the more active strong town type groups. I was given a free copy of the book, which I much appreciated. When I read it, and I've told this story elsewhere, but when I read the book, the Civic Brand idea, I just couldn't quite figure out if Petaluma could get there. And then I got to the public engagement part and just, hey, this is such a great summary of what public engagement should be, how it fails, how you can make it better. That was really the part that excited me. I had Chris Rebelo read the book. She agreed with me. So we really started pushing that aspect of it. Ryan is aware of how that has resonated thus far, and I know he's going to be talking about that at length. And then afterwards, I anticipate a robust Q&A. I've got my list of questions, but hopefully you will all get to my questions before I have to ask them. So with that, Ryan, welcome to Petaluma, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me. So yeah, I'm going to share my screen here in just a minute, run through a few slides, kind of a short presentation. And then, like Dave talked about, want to talk about the public engagement section of the book and kind of go a little bit deeper into that. And then, and that will just be, I'll stop the screen share and we'll just talk about that part, and then we can dive into some Q&A. And so I'll fire up the screen share here and we will get going. Perfect. So like Dave said, my name is Ryan Short. I run a firm called Civic Brand. Our website, civicbrand.com. On Instagram, we're at Civic Brand. That's my LinkedIn profile. And we do public engagement, placemaking, and community branding. We work across the country, but not here selling our services. Sort of here selling the book, but really just here to chat. So I did release this book. It's called The Civic Brand, The Power and Responsibility of Place. Came out last month. I was really honored that Chuck Marone, founder of Strong Towns, he wrote the foreword for the book. So, you know, we've worked with Chuck a lot over the years, respect a lot of his work and how he's really shifted the conversation around this. And while this book comes at it from a pretty different angle, I do feel like it's very connected to the message that he's pushing, and that I view what I'm talking about in this book as this kind of common thread that can pull a lot of these different urban and city initiatives together. So that's what I want to chat about a little bit today. I'll quickly just on the presentation kind of talk a little bit first just about place. And I think this is the part where You guys are all here on a Zoom, spending your evening on a Zoom with a group called Urban Chat. So I think these first few slides, you're going to be like, yeah, we get it. But when it comes to place, I think if we do think about, the average person who is going to spend, their day or their morning, they wake up in their air-conditioned home, they get in their air-conditioned car and they drive to their air-conditioned office. They spend the day alone in their air-conditioned office, and then they get back in the car and they do this whole same thing again. If that's the scenario for most people, it's not surprising that we have, poor mental health, and there's a connection between commuting. And I think when you look at that scenario, while it's a little bit exaggerated, and I'm obviously pointing out that like we're going from air-conditioned space to air-conditioned space, I think the point that I'm trying to make is how much place impacts our health, our happiness, and our opportunity. And how when we are insulated from our place, so we're not actually experiencing a true place, or we're stuck in this like artificial confined space that we move through, how that impacts us, how it impacts how we connect with other people. And so I love the term place because I think it starts to capture the built environment and some of the urban things, but it also captures things like our homes and air-conditioned spaces and how we're insulated from the environment. I think the term place also starts to capture and speak to things that aren't as physical. Even though place we think of as a physical thing, it starts to capture things like history and culture and heritage. And this is the 7th Ward in Houston. And there's a tragic story about, some bricks that were laid by freed slaves in the 4th Ward. Sorry, said not 7th Ward, 4th Ward of Houston. These bricks were removed by a contractor by mistake. And I think, our place and our built environment and those stories, the value of place is not just real estate. It's not just the streets and the roads, but it's the culture and the history and the stories and what's captured in those things that matter. And if we don't understand those things and we don't define those things and know those stories and protect those things and make them part of our identity, it's incredibly easy to lose those things like happened here in Houston. And so in those two examples, the commuter, they're being negatively shaped by their place. And then in that story with the bricks, we're kind of negatively impacting our place. And the analogy that I like to use is if you think about how a river is formed, a river is formed really slowly over time. Water's kind of flowing over a rock, and layer by layer, grained of sand off that rock, it starts to slowly form a canyon. And then at some point, that canyon, though, is now the boundary of the river, and it's kind of holding the river within it. And so is the river shaping the canyon, or is the canyon shaping the river? Well, it's kind of both. And I think that's how our relationship with place works. We are definitely actively shaping our places, but our places are very much shaping us back in a lot of ways that I think we don't always recognize. We recognize the obvious ones like traffic and economic opportunity, but I think when it comes to like the happiness, the health, some of those ways that the place shapes us aren't as obvious. And in my over-exaggerated commuter air condition example, when you're insulated from the outdoors, like the environment, maybe you don't smell smoke in the air, you don't smell pollution, or you don't feel that it's hotter than normal, and you kind of become insulated to issues and challenges. And so I think place is super important. I think the reason there's so many people on this call, you guys probably already know that, and you already think that as well. And so I do think place is too important to just leave to chance. And so, Dave posed the question of, is this community even ready for a brand or an identity? And my argument in response to that is your community is going to be making decisions every single day. And my question back would be, well, what is shaping those decisions? What is shaping our decisions about place? Are we just taking urbanist best practices? Are we taking policy or council directives? And, all probably really great things. All of those are good things. And we can make improvements on our places by just following best practices and doing things and learning. But what I've seen in my work over 17 years of doing this is even in communities where on individual issues, whether it's housing roads, fiscal responsibility. A lot of the things that you guys even mentioned are like the core tenets of your group. A community can be making progress on all of those different things, but all of those things are going in slightly different directions. We're kind of going this way on housing, and we're kind of going this way, and maybe we're making progress on both of them, but are they truly aligned in a way that is authentic to your community? And so my answer is that a brand of a place and a place's identity should be that unifying thing that is guiding all of those decisions and not changing maybe what you're doing, but just angling them slightly to where they're all kind of pointed in the same direction. And so I really strongly believe that, a brand is that answer, and a brand in most communities is that missing piece. That, again, the community can be making a lot of progress in a lot of different areas, but without a brand, they're kind of just going in a lot of different directions. And sometimes those things can be conflicting. And I fully recognize that when I say brand, most people are going to think about, selling things. They're going to think about logos, taglines. They're going to probably have a negative reaction, especially if they are passionate about, urbanism and fiscal sustainability, environmentalism. They're going to view brand as the opposite of that. They're going to view that as it's just about, corporations selling me something. They're going to think about it as extractive. They're going to think about it maybe as, if they're thinking about place, maybe they're thinking it's just about visitors, right? When we talk about place branding, where place branding kind of goes wrong and is bad is, you think about over tourism, and it's just about how do we get visitors, or how do we get outside investment or chains or different things to come into our community and extract it. And that's having massive problems, in certain places where protesters in Spain, they're like literally shooting water guns at tourists, telling them to go home, right? And so that is a brand, but my argument will be, well, that's not a good version of a brand if that's happening. A brand can be used for a lot of things. It can be used to sell, it can be used for good, it can be used for evil. I think at its best, a brand, in the traditional sense of the way people think about it, it's used to try to shape perception, and it's used to try to just influence and sell through good design. And so I'd ask, how many people on this call have been to this coffee shop? Well, this is 8 different coffee shops. And how many people have seen or taken this photo? Well, these are a bunch of different photos in different places. How many people drive this car? And I think when you start to think of a brand as a way to sell and as a way to improve perception only, you start to navigate towards the middle of what works. What coffee shop design aesthetic is the most popular? What Instagram style photo is the most popular? What car style is the most popular? And so that we can sell. And so to me, yes, that is all coming from branding, but it's branding done wrong. And so I really felt passionate about what I meant by place branding, but I saw how it was done wrong. And so I felt like branding actually needed a rebranding, which I know sounds probably a little meta or wonky, but the book that I wrote is really a rebranding of place branding. And the big difference is that I think the brand isn't about shaping perception. It's not about the latest aesthetic or design. It's not about selling. And instead, if we think about a brand purely as this North Star of where are we headed? Where is our community trying to go? And we have a lot of different people in the community. They want different things. We're possibly divisive and divided, but there's something shared about why we're all here. And there should be able to have some shared vision of where we're headed that we can be working towards. So even if we're still making progress on all these different initiatives, housing, infrastructure, roads, fiscal, instead of those things just going in positive but different directions, how do we make them go in positive but slightly the same directions towards that North Star? And I think one of the key ways to do it, prior to understanding what makes your community unique, is to simply take a triple bottom line approach to decision making. And, triple bottom line means you consider people, profit, and the planet. And so in the business world, you could take 2 companies, like say Amazon and Patagonia, and say, I could ask you which company is more successful. And how you answer that would depend on what your definition of success. And if it's purely profit, you might make a good case that Amazon is more profitable. But if you took a triple bottom line, not here to overly make a critique or comment about either company, but I think it's probably fair to say that if you took a triple bottom line approach of considering success, the impact on people, profit, and the planet as like three equal pillars, I think you would have a pretty good case that Patagonia is more successful. Regularly recognized as one of the greatest places to work, kind of a cultural driver, even in the early days about, childcare at offices and time off for people and what work-life balance. They too are a profitable company. I'm definitely not anti-profit. I think profit can be a good thing. If a company is not profitable, it cannot keep its employees employed. If a city doesn't need to be profitable, but it needs to be fiscally responsibility, and it needs to provide opportunity for profit for its citizens and its businesses. And then that last part, planet, you could be crushing it from a profit standpoint. Your people could be happy, but if we're draining our natural resources to do so, I would say that's not a good long-term plan. And so I think to start working towards that North Star and using a brand and vision, one of the simplest ways to do that is to just look at decisions through this triple bottom line of people, profit, and the planet. And I think the key, though, is to where it becomes really special is when you make those decisions, you can benefit all three of these pillars, but you still do so in a way that is truly authentic to your community. And that's the part where best practices and a triple bottom line aren't going to get you there on its own. You're going to have to get into engagement. And so I'll stop the screen share and I'll just kind of talk through this kind of next part because I do want to spend time talking about the engagement piece. I think when people talk about public engagement and I looked at some of the general plan public engagement that you guys are doing in your community, and there's a lot of really great things, that are happening with, community pop-ups and meeting people where they are and going out, and a lot of really great things. And so I'm definitely not critiquing how your community has approached engagement. But when we look at communities across the country, and I think you guys probably will recognize this, that, there is often engagement is either a task or a phase within a project. And so that means it starts and it stops. And then when you do the next project, it picks back up and it starts and it stops. And there's often a different consultant involved, maybe a different department. And for engagement to really be successful and for a community to really get where it needs to be, to have that dialogue, to understand what it means to be this community, we really have to work towards engagement being a culture. It can't be a task. It can't be a project. It has to be this culture that feels like it's never really starting and stopping. It's kind of always happening. And I think there's probably some other challenges that all communities face. And that's that when we do engagement, you might hear it listed as, oh, it's the usual suspects, right? Like the same people engage, the same folks show up. And, when you look at the demographics of these individuals, there's definitely nothing wrong with these individuals engaging. We should be thankful that they're engaging. But the reality is that they are often older, whiter property owners, homeowners across all communities in the country. And I think when we look at that and unpack that and think about like, well, why is that there's some easy, obvious answers of like, well, maybe they have more free time on their hand. They do own their home. And so they're more vested in what the city's doing. So they're going to show up and speak up for their property values and what they think should happen. But I think, we started really making an effort to hear everybody in a community. And so we did things like go to people where they are and meet them physically. And that's a great first start. And that's really important, so doing pop-ups and attending events and meeting people where they are physically, not expecting them to come to us at town hall or meetings, or not expecting them to have read books about urbanism and be part of urbanist groups. Like that's, takes a level of privilege to even have the time and awareness that these things even exist, right? And so meeting people where they are physically is a really important start. But where we really saw the game changed from engagement was when we started thinking about how do we engage people and meet them where they are, not just physically, but emotionally and like psychologically where they are. And so when in the book I talk about this, we look at, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I know it's kind of debatable whether that's accurate or true as far as like how needs work. There's a lot of debate about that. But if we look at it purely from an engagement standpoint, and you think about people at the bottom of that level that are dealing with food insecurity and housing insecurity, they're not ready to engage you about your general plan of what's happening 30 years from now when they're trying to think about how do I pay rent tomorrow, or where am I going to work tomorrow, or do I have a meal for my kids next week, right? And so when we need to engage those people, but if we just have tactics that like get them to take our survey, it can be pretty patronizing, I think. And so I think we really need to find a way to, how do we engage them in a way that both helps them meet that need and at the same time gets them to engage? Because then it's a win-win. And so we've done things in communities like $5 for 5 minutes. We're in a community where we're really struggling to hear from a certain neighborhood and demographic. We partnered with United Grocery Stores and we stood out there with a stack of $5 bills. And most people going to this particular grocery store were using SNAP benefits to pay for their food. And so having an extra $5 cash was really exciting to them. But they were most excited to go, wait, the city's coming to me. The community's wanting to hear what I think. No one cares what I think. And so we were meeting them where they are, but we were also filling a need at that level and helping them kind of get to that next step while engaging. And I think at every level of that hierarchy of needs, there's a lesson to be learned because, there's people that have a great job. They're not worried about rent. They're not worried about food, but they still don't engage. And maybe that's because they just feel more comfortable within their social group. That's where I think you'll find everything from, certain cultural groups that they just, the Hispanic community wants to hang out with other Hispanics. LGBTQ, they feel more comfortable in their group. It can be skateboarders. It can be soccer moms. These different interest groups, people feel naturally comfortable in their groups. And when they come to a city meeting, yeah, they might care about their city, but they feel like they're stepping out a little bit too much out of their group because they're where they're not quite met at a civic level is at that esteem and recognition level. And so meeting people where they are physically, but also partnering with these different groups that have relationships. So if you're trying to engage, Spanish speaking population, it's probably, if you're not getting engagement, it's probably not because the survey's not translated, because we've translated a ton of surveys and you still get a couple responses. You should translate it. That's the right thing to do. But that's probably not the issue that's not being overcome. The issue is probably that they don't feel comfortable taking the survey. They don't really feel, maybe they don't feel informed enough to answer the questions, or they don't feel like it's their place to say. But if you can go and meet with groups where they are comfortable, a Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, a church that they belong to, and meet them where they are and have their own community members basically relay why this is important, why it matters, and kind of help be a partner in that engagement, you can help them maintain that level of esteem within their hierarchy of needs and do engagement. And so I think just thinking about not just physically where are people, but thinking about what are they needing and what's their true like psychological issue with engaging and why are they not. And so, talked about tapping into partners. I think one of the other things I talk about in the book a ton that I think is really important is, civic leaders I have the greatest sympathy in the world for civic leaders because they're constantly beat up, right? They're overworked, they're underpaid, they're getting yelled at by the public often, and then council kind of like throws them under the bus, right? And not in your community, I'm sure, but in most communities. And so it makes sense that both elected officials and city leaders, they want to first do engagement because that's the right thing to do. And they want it to be backed by data. And those both sound like really great things to do, but where we see that go wrong is sometimes we want that data to really take the arrows for us and be a shield so that we don't have to make hard decisions. And instead we can say, well, I didn't make this decision. The people spoke, and here's the pie chart that shows what the people said. And so it makes it really easy to say, let's be data driven. Let's be, let's make data driven decisions and get this engagement data. The problem with that is I feel very strongly that engagement should not be viewed as voting, because when you try to view engagement as voting, you're going to get winner and you're going to get a loser. Engagement should be about surfacing viewpoints. And there might be a winning viewpoint, a more popular viewpoint, and there might be a minority viewpoint. But that minority viewpoint should absolutely be considered in the decision making, right? And so, but we want to say, if there's an issue and 80% are for and 20% are against, it's really easy to go, well, we should go with the 80%. That's the majority vote. They won. It's democracy. We did engagement. The people have spoken. But you might need to design a solution that addresses that 20% and that 80%. Or you might even need to make an equitable choice that favors the 20% in some cases, because it might be the right equitable thing to do. And so it depends on the issue. But I think the key is if you can just change the language from this idea of engagement data being engagement and data led to data inspired. Don't blindly follow the data. Use the data to inform you to make those decisions, and try to surface different viewpoints and see how that shapes the decision making. Because I think when we blindly follow the data, what's the point of being a leader at that point? If you're not having to make tough decisions, if you're not having to make compromise, if you're not having to really read between the lines. And I think that's why too, we favor surveys and things that we can make pie charts with the answer, as opposed to the qualitative. That's a very quantitative thing. We can make a pie chart and say how many people said yes or no. But I believe qualitative, that's where the good stuff is. The conversations, the stories. Before we started this, folks were asking about the density in the town that I live in. It's a really small 6,000 person mountain town. And we had a ballot initiative related to housing. Both sides of the issue, complete opposite sides, they both cited keep Salida affordable as why they voted yes, or keep Salida affordable as to why they voted no. And so you can't do surveys, you can't look at ballots to understand what decision to make. You have to have those qualitative conversations. And when you did that, you very quickly saw that there was an audience that thought, well, when I look at dense urban places, I think of New York City, and those places are expensive. And so density should equal unaffordable. So that's bad. And then you have an audience that goes, well, I recognize we're in a mountain community and we value our surroundings, and so we need to pack in a little tighter. And if we can have greater density, maybe we can bring down the average size of the home and it can be more affordable. And so if you focus it on surfacing those viewpoints, you all of a sudden go, y'all are kind of saying the exact same thing. You just have very different language and ideas about how to get there. And quantitative data and engagement would have just said, how many are for it or how many are against, and move on to the next issue. We guess we're really divided. And so I really value this viewpoints qualitative approach to engagement. And I think, another thing just on that surveying, I think it's really easy to, one, have engagement fatigue in a community. You're over surveying. We're asking people questions on all these things, and then they don't really know when it's going to happen or what the follow through is. But I think a really big problem that we have to make sure we address is just asking the wrong questions, right? And so we see this quite a bit, and I'll use an example that you guys probably can relate to is, if we were to ask a survey question, should we add a lane to this road? Kind of similar to my keep it affordable question. By just asking that question in that way, we're kind of assuming, one, that we know what the problem is and that we think a lane is a solution, but we're also jumping to the conclusion that the person answering the question has thought that through. And so they might go, well, yeah, the road's congested, let's add a lane, right? Well, I do strongly believe there's a role of the user and the resident, and there's still very much a role of the leader and the expert. And the expert needs to ask smarter questions like, what is the purpose of this road? What is your goal for this road? Because if the goal of the road is to create, on this road, we want to create a, more vibrant small business community, and we want to make it more walkable. And yeah, it's congested, so I think adding a lane would be good. Well, that expert could go, I hear your viewpoint, but the solution is actually probably slowing the cars, right? And not adding a lane. Whereas if they said, well, the goal is to kind of get through this as quick as possible, then yeah, maybe we need to add a lane, right? And the same thing would be true as if, if you think about a doctor and patient relationship, the patient is the expert on their symptoms and how they're feeling and what their goals are from a personal health standpoint. But the doctor should be the expert on what does that person need. So a doctor's not going to ask you, would you like a cast on your arm? Would you like this surgery? Is this what you want? Because that's just assuming that that patient knows what they have and what the solution should be. Instead, the patient's going to look at vitals, ask them questions, what are your goals? And they're going to recommend different things based on their different goals. Is that person just an average person in their 20s, or are they 50? Or are they a senior citizen? Are they an Olympic athlete? And they're going to prescribe different things based on their goals. And so I think we really have to get intentional about really thinking about what are the questions that we're asking. And, in all of those examples of, surfacing viewpoints, asking the right questions, that requires pretty strong leadership, because that means that you're going to have to do some digging into the qualitative data. Leaders are going to have to make some decisions and choices, and it's a lot harder to hide behind, well, survey results said this, so don't be mad at me. I just voted how my constituents voted. And so I get that it's hard. And I led with, I have the greatest respect in the world for civic leaders because they have a really tough job. Our whole election cycles and is built on like short-term wins, and you got to kind of point to what you did or you'll be out, and you don't really have time to make long-term right choices. I think it's easy to make the short-term choice or to react to the loud voice. But I think if we really feel like we're here to shape our community and shape the identity of our place, we got to surface those viewpoints. We got to ask the right questions. We got to meet people where they are, not just physically, but emotionally. And I think two little stories I'll kind of share, and then we can dive into some Q&A. In the book, I spent 3 chapters talking about public engagement. It's really, really important. At the same time, we have to know when to stop doing public engagement and when to actually do something. And so this story, I do share this in the book, but I remember clear as day, this is about 7 or 8 years ago, we were working on a comprehensive plan. We were taking a tour of the community. Our team was in a van, kind of getting driven around by the city and seeing all the sites and the new development projects and all the neighborhoods. And we just finished lunch. And after lunch, we were going to be going to head to this neighborhood. And it was a community, the whole city, I would say, is probably 15 to 20% African American population. But this neighborhood that we were going to, about 95% African American population. It was a food desert. It was a very challenging neighborhood. They had a lot of issues. And I remember as we turned the corner to head into this food desert, we passed the grocery store and we start heading up this pretty steep hill. And this is in Texas in the summer. It is about easily over 100 degrees. And we see this mom pushing a stroller with a kid, and the stroller's loaded down with groceries. And she's walking in the street, pushing the stroller up the hill because there's not a sidewalk. And her house is about a mile away up this hill, and she doesn't have a car. And most people in this neighborhood, if they have a car, they have one car, and whoever works probably takes that to work. And she was clearly at home with young children. And so obviously that's a tough thing to see. We're not going to get out and build a sidewalk that day. That's not our job. That's not our expertise, right? But in that moment, with that instance, we don't need to make sure that we hit enough of the African American population on our survey for the comprehensive plan to know what we need to do right there. We don't need to do an extra focus group, because at that point it is patronizing and honestly tokenism, and we're kind of trying to check a box and make our engagement data look good. Now, we do need to talk to those people. We do need to listen to those people. But I remember we were a sub-consultant. I remember the general idea was that that's definitely going to be a recommendation in this comp plan, which is probably going to come out a year from now. And so obviously you can see that disconnect. And I checked on this. There still is not a sidewalk on that hill. It is still a food desert. And so that is an area where I do think sometimes with engagement, we can have really good intentions and we can want to do equitable engagement, and we want to have a nice report that says we reached this many people in this many neighborhoods and we checked these boxes and we hit this many of each demographic and age and race. But sometimes our goal, and we've fallen victim to this, sometimes our goal is to make that page in the report look good. And we already surfaced the viewpoint. That viewpoint for that person was surfaced by driving down that street. I don't need them to come to a focus group. I don't need them to take time out of their day to take my survey to understand their viewpoint. And so I think that's, there's a lot of challenges. There's funding, there's sidewalk grading on steep hills. I get all the reasons why it's not an overnight fix, but that's an instance where we don't need to just keep doing engagement about it to make our report look good. And so the last story I'll share to kind of tie this back to brand, how does all of this engagement in doing this work and talking to people tie back to like, well, who we are from a North Star brand and identity standpoint. And good friend of mine, Jason Thorne, he's now the lead planner in the city of Toronto, Ontario. But at the time he was of the story, he was with Hamilton, Ontario. And their whole brand and identity was that they wanted to be a music city, right? They wanted to be known as a music city. And they could have focused on really big things. They could have built a multi-million-dollar performing arts center, had a big music festival, pay $50,000 to bring in the big names and play this festival and we're a music city. But by doing a lot of the things that I just talked about, surfacing viewpoints, don't take surveys, but like have conversations and qualitative data and listen to people and meet them where they are and understanding where their challenges and where their needs are, they surfaced some really impactful things they could do now that speak more to their brand than those big things were. And so they did things like musician loading zones. If a drummer can't park in front of a venue and unload his drums, can you really call yourself a music city? But that was a challenge, that was a viewpoint, and that was an issue, and that was never going to show up in a survey as a big need. But when you did the qualitative research and you talked to people and you surfaced things and you connected it back to your identity of your North Star, who are we trying to be? We saw like, oh, wow, yeah, we should have musician loading zones. They also looked at their busking laws. If we're shooing guitar player off the street, can we really be a music city? And they came up with all these really small things that they could do very cheaply and very quickly overnight to truly authentically live their brand. But they couldn't have surfaced any of those things without doing that engagement work and going really deep. And so I want to stop here and kind of turn it over and see what questions you have. But I guess just to recap on that engagement, I mean, I've recapped it a couple of times, I feel like, but surfacing the viewpoints, meeting people where they are, not just physically, but emotionally. And if you can help them meet a need while you're engaging, that's a win-win. So yeah, appreciate your time and happy to dive in and see what questions you guys might have.
Well, Ryan, thank you. That was exactly the presentation I was hoping you'd make. It was so fun to listen to that, having read through those sections a couple of times. I failed before we began to say, put your questions into chat. So instead, if we could maybe use hand raises to get some Q&A underway. Come on, somebody throw a hand up there. I can't believe nobody's raising a hand. There you go, Chris. I was hoping you'd jump in.
Yeah, that's actually a clap. I couldn't find the hand, but consider it a clap. I read your book, Ryan. I think it's great. So I'm really excited that you're here. Can you, in the book, you talk about moving from consensus to consent. And I think I always, we got to get consensus. Can you talk about that in terms of your brand and engagement and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the simplest way that I first started to think about that was, when we would do design work and we're showing people design concepts and we're asking them, what's your personal opinion, right? Everybody on this call might have different opinions about which one is our favorite, right? Because you might like blue and I might like green. And, we have different reasons why we have our personal favorite. And I think when our goal is to get to where we have the most top choices as everybody's number one, sometimes that waters down a solution so much that we got the most number ones, but did we sacrifice on what we're trying to create? Right? If my goal was to design a new style of shirt, And we all had to agree upon it. Well, we're all wearing, pretty different shirts. Dan's got his tie-dye shirt on and I've got my hoodie. And, I think we'd probably end up with a plain white t-shirt. And that might not be the best thing that we need, right? But it would make the most people happy. And I think when you talk about the consent, you start to have conversations and dialogue, and you start getting past what is my top choice and getting into what would I be okay with. Like the hoodie's my top choice of a shirt, but I'd be okay with something that just keeps me a little warm, right? And so now you started to surface my need and my viewpoint, like I talked about in engagement. And so now Dan can go, well, what about a long sleeve tie-dye shirt, right? And now we're starting to get some consensus instead of consent. And so, or consent instead of consensus. And I think that's really a simplified version of it. It's much harder when you're not making silly examples like shirt styles. But I think the idea is, everybody feels like they're fighting for, I've got to win, you've got to lose in a debate. And sometimes, some people are going to have to be okay with their second choice, right? And so it's really just kind of, you have to understand the viewpoints, I think, to be able to get at that.
Really? No more raised hands?
gotta
There's
be
got to be
kidding.
somebody out there.
Well, am I still on? I'll ask another one.
Hey, go for it, Chris. I've got a
Yeah.
list here too, but
Yeah, I know. So can you talk about how your firm looks and helps communities deal with like the issue of tourism? It's a big deal here in Petaluma. We're in wine country. We need tourists. They help, they're important, I think, for our financial well-being. But you also talk about destination management. Like in your opinion, what's the best way to approach that?
Yeah, I think, first, when we do work with communities that, sometimes we're working with city governments, sometimes we're working with tourism entities. When we're working with those tourism entities, a big part of our focus is helping them shift purely from destination marketing to destination management. And I think a lot of that starts with that triple bottom line, right? Like the goal should not just be to get as many visitors there as possible. That would just be taking a profit only bottom line, a single bottom line. But we're not saying profit's not important, and we're not saying visitors aren't important, right? We want to think about how we disperse visitors. I think most problems and challenges, whether you look at like food, it's rarely a lack of enough food. It's more of a distribution, is the people that need the food aren't where the food is. And when you look at flooding, it's not that there's a lack of water, it's that all of a sudden all the water's here and there's no water here. And I think tourism and visitors are the same way, even with the community. They're all on the same trail, or they're all in the same town, or they're all on the same weekend or the same season. And so it becomes about distribution and management and expanding shoulder seasons, educating visitors on what's respectable and how to like be a good steward in a place. And so I think that triple bottom line is a really easy, some entities are formally shifting into destination management organizations. But even if you haven't gone through those formal steps, I think just taking a triple bottom line approach to your decision-making is like a really quick shortcut to acknowledging that visitors are important, but if it's at the expense of people who are our locals and our planet. And in the book, since you read it, you'll know, like I switched the planet version of the triple bottom line to place. Because I think place, our environment, our planet's the ultimate place. So it still captures the environmental aspects. But when you say place, it also starts to think about our architecture, our built environment, and some of the other things that we want to make sure we're protecting. So yeah, I mean, and again, the community I live in, it's a small, it's very important. Tourism is very important to this community. But it's also even educating the business owners, because there's business owners that'll be like, oh, we hate the tourists. And then as soon as it's a slow weekend, they're like, uh-oh, we need the tourists back, right? So it's a delicate balance. So yeah, hopefully that started to answer your question.
I think I saw Stephanie Adams waving at me. And then I think Deb Fox had a hand up also. So Stephanie, did you have a question? Stephanie, you're muted. You're still muted.
So sorry, everybody. I just have to say I'm just really fired up about listening to you, Ryan, because you have the answers to many of the issues that Petaluma has been having. And Specifically, you can't please all the people all the time. You just have to make a decision that's best for the community. You can't get everybody on board. The whole fine balance fiasco was like, just, it's still going on. It's ridiculous. So we have really like a fine city council, like is forward thinking and very working very hard on engaging the population and informing us and letting us know what's happening. And it's all fabulous. But I think sometimes just making a decision that is the right thing to do is really great. And so thank you, City Council, and thank you, Ryan. This like awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm out.
Yeah. And Dave, I don't want to steal one of your questions if this is a question, but before we were chatting, Dave kind of mentioned that, he's like, hey, I really liked a lot of things in the book, but it can seem a little idealistic, right? And I think to your point and that you just made about having to make a decision, everything I said is very idealistic, and it's very much about like the ideal, and the goal is to just move like even 1% towards that. But what success looks like is not everybody in your community thanking you and going, great job. Everyone says you made the right choice. If that's what we're looking for, we're never going to get there. I think what the reality is a leader being able to be confident and go, I know some people are going to be unhappy. I know this is some people's second, third, fourth choice, but we went about this the right way. We surfaced the viewpoints. We didn't just have people vote. We listened, we understood, and we carefully crafted a decision that we think is the best impact for this community. And we're going to make a decision and move forward. And if success is only, and everybody loves you, then you're not going to get there. But if success is you feel confident and can sleep at night that you made the right decision, you're still going to get the Facebook comments. You're still going to get the emails, but you can hopefully sleep a little better that you made the right choice. And so it is idealistic. And I don't think anybody's community is going to do it. And even when you do it, the community is not going to even recognize that you did it. They're still going to be upset and fired up about certain things and whatever their personal passion issue is.
I see Nick Harris and John Crowley, but I think at one point Deb Fox had her hand up. Deb, did you still want to ask a question?
No, I did not. Thank you.
Oh, you
Bill.
did? Okay, very good. I thought I saw a hand there. Nick, the floor is yours.
Hey, thank you. So the question is, how do you square elections by popular vote and running a campaign that's going to achieve a popular vote, and then governing by knowing what's right, which, if I'm understanding correctly, is not necessarily going with the popular sentiment?
Right. When you say an election, are you talking about over like a certain, like a ballot initiative, or are you talking about like an elected official?
No, yeah. So like a mayor or a city council member.
Yeah. And so are you saying like if somebody gets elected that?
Oh, so let me just, and I'll sort of take that through line. What's happening is that people are getting so upset that there's a lot of discussion about recalls. Because what people are running on, and then versus how the behavior is and what the decisions are that are being made, it's not congruent, right? So the question is, how do we have a government system where the people who win elections win by popular vote, which is going to be most likely people that are campaigning on things that are not most attractive to minorities, right? How does that square with then governing by just knowing what's right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like a breach of contract, is it not?
100%. Yeah. And I don't have the answer or solution for that. I think there's a lot of things just inherently about our system that make it to where we have systemic issues. Even the really simple things like 3 minutes of public comment at a council meeting, right? In my opinion, that trains the public that when you're upset, you come and you talk for 3 minutes. But even in that system, when you're done, they go, okay, thank you, and they sit down. There's not a dialogue, there's not a conversation. And so I understand the problem with that. I don't have a solution to fix government and fix that. I do think the more that groups like this, though, can talk about a broader range of issues and a broader range of criteria for issues, I think the better, because I do think single issue candidates at local levels can be problematic. They can get a lot of people fired up about one really specific thing and they can win. And then, well, is that the right thing? I also think there's just some ethics within elected officials that, just because whoever voted for you to get in, once you're in, on paper, I believe you're supposed to represent everyone, not just those that voted you in. We see those challenges at every level of government, where once you're in, cool, I'm just going to serve those that got me in. But I would hope at a civic level, we can get a little closer to maybe your buddies and people that share the same views as you got that person elected. But once they're elected, I would hope they have the integrity, or at least the rail guards of other council members and staff and consultants that are saying the right things about engagement to like surface those viewpoints. So I'm not going to be that idealistic and say that I have the solution of how to fix elections and in that type of process. But if I'm understanding your question, I mean, I think, yeah, I don't know that I have the solution for that, as much as just the more we can talk, I think the more people will realize they might have a shared viewpoint. Whereas if they just took a survey or they just vote for candidates, they might feel a lot more polarized because one's going to be red and one's going to be blue in that pie chart, and it's which one's bigger, as opposed to a summary of viewpoint conversation. Maybe there's some shared words there, right? So sorry if that doesn't totally answer your question, but that's my best shot at it.
It's adequate. Thank you.
Yeah, Nick, that was a great question. And Ryan, great attempt to come up with an answer. And I think about that one all the time. John Crowley.
Thanks, Dave. Ryan, you were talking earlier about coming to consent and arriving at people's second or third choice. Sounds very much like ranked choice voting, which I'm very much in favor of, as most people on this call will agree to, or know that I'm very much in favor for it. Have you used that much in your line of work, not just for candidates, but for coming to decisions on? For example, we're using it to decide on our book for the book club. So you might not get your first choice, but you might get your second, third, or even fourth choice, but at least to be something that you'll be kind of satisfied with.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit to that, please?
Yeah, we use it a ton because, we have to, in our work, we have to pitch strategies. We have to pitch design concepts. We have to pitch a lot of things to committees and groups, and we have to get them to ultimately approve stuff so we can move on to the next milestone. And sometimes it's just through conversation and that deliberative process of like talking through it and talking about trade-offs, and sometimes it's a ranked choice voting. We try to, obviously like a book club, what's our top 3 choice of books? That's probably the most quick, efficient way to do that. On bigger issues that have a little more meaning and you want to surface those viewpoints, I think having those conversations is really important. This is a reference that may fall flat, but we use this line from a movie almost weekly in our office, and old movie Spinal Tap from a long time ago. There's a line where he's like, he goes, "It's fine, but I hate it." And so we say that regularly. It's like, "It's fine, but I hate it." As a joke of, I understand most people like this. I can see where it needs to go. My viewpoint's been surfaced. It's fine. Let's move forward with that. But just know I hate it, right? And so, yeah, I think we all want to win. We all want to get our choice, but sometimes it's fine, but I hate it is kind of what we need to move forward and make progress in the community.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Renee?
Oh, I'm still laughing about the Spinal Tap reference. I'm wondering with the cities that you work with, maybe whether you go in and they're not clear on a brand, or are you working with them to help develop that? Because I can think of in Petaluma, there are so many things that we could call our brand. How do you arrive at that?
Yeah, and a good chunk of our work is helping communities figure that out and uncover that. And when we're doing those branding projects, we almost never use the term like rebranding, because that, companies can rebrand, and that implies more that this is who we are, and we're going to strategically change directions and go this way. Whereas I like to say it's more like uncovering the brand. Like your identity and your brand probably honestly is really there. It just might not be like, you might not be using the same words to define it, or it might not be fully realized or reaching its full potential. But yeah, a lot of communities, I think the brand's there, and it's our role to come in and help them kind of uncover that, package that, define it. Because it's not that the like symbols and logos and taglines and things that you think of when you create a brand, those aren't what move the needle. Those just become that like reminder that you can put up behind the dais and serve not for external marketing purposes, but as that daily reminder when council's making decisions to go, this is what we're about. This brand reminds me of, and I talk about in the book, like, most people don't think of religions as a brand, right? And I don't think Christians would say that the cross is their logo and that, but it's a reminder of what they're about, and it should kind of help them through decisions, right? And so every religion has hundreds of years and depth of text, but it is valuable when they can summarize it and point to like symbols and short ways to define it, so that as they live and make decisions, they can point to that. And so, yeah, I think a lot of communities, they might have competing things, like you mentioned, like we could be this, we could be that. But I usually think there is something there. There's usually something there, and we just have to kind of uncover it and package it.
And so in the example you gave of the Music City, that's kind of a very definitive thing. Is the branding that you're ever doing more around a more abstract concept?
Typically it is when it is for a community. That was a little bit more of a, they had already kind of like gone down this path of deciding that they were that, and they were just trying to live it out in a more authentic way. And that was also a little bit more of like a visitor facing piece for a district, as opposed to like a broader community. So that example wasn't maybe the best example for like a broad community brand and identity, but as much as like how do you use engagement to live a really specific narrative and brand. A more specific one, I'll just give you again the example, because I think some of you guys kind of heard part of this as we were chatting before everybody joined. So I live in a small Colorado mountain town, and when I think about, what is the brand and identity of this place where I live, I come back to this idea of the identity of this community is about guide culture. And I talk about this in the book, is the idea is about guide culture. And that's because we have the most commercially rafted stretch of river in the country. We have ski instructors, fly fishing guides. There's all these guides that live in the community and really shape the identity. And it's not just the active guides, but when we look at our city council members, our high school principals, all these business owners, a lot of those people originally came to this community originally as rafting guides or guides. And that doesn't just shape their employment, but it shapes the art, the culture, the style, the aesthetic. It shapes so much about the community. And so if we're to say that this community is about guide culture, we don't just take that and go market our community and put raft guides on the cover of the brochures. When we're making decisions about our housing policy, can guides afford to live in this community? Are people allowed to sleep in their vans in a car? Because that's what it takes. And so we use that brand and that guide to like shape those downstream decisions to really to live that. Because if we don't, and we lose those guides, we don't just lose the people that are getting our tourists down the river, we lose our entire culture and our entire identity. And so I think it's a little simpler in a small community to really pinpoint something real quickly like that example. But I think most communities can probably start to uncover what that is. And it doesn't have to be the unique thing that no other community in the world can say. That's where you get into the roadside attraction type stuff of like the largest frying pan, and that's what we're all about, those like kind of gimmicky type of brands. So yeah, hopefully that answered your question there.
Thank you. That's great. That was a wonderful example.
John, is your hand back up? Or you just didn't take it down?
No, didn't take it down.
Okay. Keith, if you're still here, you asked a really good question in the chat. Perhaps you want to verbalize that? Keith, are you here?
Yeah, Dave, I'm here. Sorry.
No problem.
I'm having a really bad hair day, so I don't want to be on camera. So I'm just asking, my question was really, isn't there an equal responsibility for the citizen to engage and learn some of the nuances rather than just do a knee-jerk reaction in front of a city council or planning commission meeting? Shouldn't they also have an obligation to know what they're talking about rather than just a single issue?
Man, I wish they did. And I wish being informed and educated was a prereq for having an opinion. But as you know, it's not. But again, I think to go back to my doctor-patient analogy, patients probably go into doctor's office with pretty strong opinions about what they have and what they need, right? And I think the doctor needs to hear them and diagnose it and listen to them, possibly educate them and inform them, and then offer the right suggestion. So I don't know if there's a specific example that response misses the mark on what you're asking, but I think, yeah, I mean, we want people to understand everything about how things work, but the reality is they don't. They often have a lot of misinformation, and their neighbor told them something, and now they're fired up about it and talking in front of council. But so, you know, but they're not an elected official. They're not a policymaker. They're not an expert. They're not a professional. And so I think there's a little less onus on them to do that. And I think that's where it is easy to say, well, it's also on them to find out when the public meeting is and come and read the packet. And I do think there's something to what you're saying, but I also want to make sure that those that are elected, paid, and are experts, it's more on them. It's on everybody. Everybody has a responsibility to be informed, but it's more on the experts than the patient or the resident.
If we need an educated populace to make sure democracy works, then the onus is on educating the population, right?
Absolutely. And I think education is a huge part of engagement. Engagement it's a two-way street. It's not just, so in that doctor-patient, the doctor has to probably do some education to the patient. And maybe the doctor's talking to them about what kind of food they should be eating, and instead, and maybe that they should walk a little bit more, and maybe they should do this, and they don't necessarily need this medicine or surgery they're asking for. And so 100%. And I do think that, that starts at a lot bigger, broader level than just even a city should be responsible for. I mean, I think there should be more civics in school and public schools in general, but that's not my, I can't just wave a wand and make that happen. But I think most people, they turn on their water and clean water comes out, and they don't know why that happens or how that happens.
My criticism is of the system that doesn't educate individuals to have the civic knowledge that they need to have. That's all, and then I'll shut up.
Yeah, I share a lot of that criticism of the system too.
I see there are two more hands raised, which is great, but let me ask one follow-up question there. I think there's a point here where you and I are going to differ or are going to diverge from the Strong Towns orthodoxy. They talk all the time about bottom up works better than top down. I've always thought there needs to be a balance of both. And I think I'm hearing you saying the same thing.
I think it's got to come. Yeah, I think we got to hit it from both sides, and I think that the leaders and I don't know if I have time to share. I'll give you the super quick version of this story. Or do I have time, I guess, Dave?
Yeah, go for it.
So when we started our company 17 years ago, I'm 45 now. The first year I was 28 years old. I got invited to this place called the Headliners Club in Austin, Texas. And it was a private invite-only restaurant that was like the who's who of like state senators, developers. It was like a country club without a golf course. And I was invited to this lunch. And when I got up there, I quickly realized, wow, everyone in this room, these are the people making the decisions. This is who's shaping the community. Because I looked out the window and I saw the musician on the street, the shopkeeper, these people that thought that they were doing their day-to-day business. And I was like, oh, wow, these people, that's how sad and unfortunate. These people think that they're shaping their community down on the street. And the reality is it's these people up in the Headliners Club. So that's the first part of the story. I was like, oh no, only this high-end power is shaping our communities. But then fast forward, as part of that same project, I got to meet with the governor of Texas, and he told me an economic development story about in the 80s, a Fortune 50 company was at the finish line of relocating to Dallas, Texas. It would have been a huge win for the community. Every realtor and chamber of commerce within 200 miles would have cited that they created jobs, and they would all claim a win from it. It was at the finish line, and they lost the deal because the CEO's wife said, Dallas has no culture. And at the time, that was very true. Like, downtown Dallas was dead. There was no arts and culture. And so that was almost the opposite story, that like, oh, wow, these small people on the streets actually have the power. And so it's a little different in grassroots, top down. But the reason I tell those stories together is in shaping our cities, there's still a lot of power in that Headliners Club room, developers, politicians, but they're desperately trying to recreate the things that the people on the street have the power to create: the art, the music, the culture. And so I think it takes both. I don't think it's one or the other. I think strategically an organization like Strong Towns can say our efforts are better focused on the grassroots part, and I don't blame them for that, because maybe they feel like they can inspire that change quicker. But the reality is I think it's coming from both, and it has to come from both. And to the first question before that, I think there's more onus on the top down, because you're actually hired to do that job.
Thank you. Chris?
So to follow up somewhat on Keith's question, one thing that I keep thinking about from your book is, and this leads into how to get people involved, or people know that they have a responsibility to their community, is you talk about some situation where some project, and rather than ask the question, which which design do you like the best? The question is better asked, which design gets us closer to our goal? And I love that so much because it took people out of their personal mindset. Well, I don't like this, I like this, I like that. And it's like, oh, I have to think about the community when I express myself about this particular design. And I just thought that was like, it literally, it's like something inside my head switched, and I go, oh my God, that's the way we really need to like approach this stuff. Once we have, kind of a common goal or vision, or that North Star that you talk about.
Yeah, and I think you do have to do that work up front to have a shared vision and a shared strategy. But that part's usually the easier part. Like the community that I'm in, everybody running for city council wants to address affordable housing, right? No one is running against not addressing affordable housing. They just all have different ideas of how to do it and what they need to protect. And so, instead of saying, does this zoning, are you for or against this zoning on this particular parcel? Well, I'm gonna have a lot of opinions, whether that's like in my backyard or here, but does this zoning help us address these housing issues? That's a different answer and a different question. And we use that. Our whole process is designed to eliminate personal taste. We want to know what you think, but I want to know what you think about a bigger picture strategy, not just, do you like red? Do you like blue? Do you want a house there? Do you want a house here? I want to know, like, we're collectively working towards something. And so I do think, just again, asking questions in a way that is designed to eliminate personal taste as much as possible. And sometimes it's actually asking the question twice. What do you think about this initiative? Get their answer. Which side of that initiative do you think will better address this? Like, it's kind of the same question, but it's not,
Thank you. Jessica, thanks for joining us. Floor is yours.
Thanks. I'm sort of reluctant to ask this question because I feel like we've had a little bit of a grievance thread in our questions, and obviously there's some challenges around town. And full disclosure, I'm chair of the planning commission, so I do get yelled at sometimes. And I guess I couldn't help but think when I was listening to those chapters about engagement, you made a really good point that people don't like to not get their way. And we should close the loop and let people know the status of a project if they've made the effort to chime in, which I do appreciate. What I have struggled with, and I'm curious your thoughts on, is how to say in a compassionate way, I heard your point of view and we listened to you and we've gone a different way. Because I think often around town, there's an engagement process, which, is flawed in a variety of ways. And then people say, you didn't listen, you didn't listen, you didn't listen, when really we took the inputs, but we chose something else. And then they feel like there was no listening at all. And that can get hard to navigate.
Yeah, it's tough. And a lot of times they will never be happy because you didn't choose them, right? Like you didn't choose their idea. So no matter what you say, but we listened, we heard you, we went another way. I would just add, and here's why, and like break it down of like, you wanted this and I understand that, but here's this goal, which I think you probably hopefully share and support this bigger picture vision or goal, right? That we need affordable housing for service workers, right? But I understand you don't want that project here, just to take a classic like NIMBY example, right? Like, but I know you will be unhappy about this. It's not the outcome you wanted, but I hope you can see that we listened, but ultimately we had to make the choice that we thought better got us towards our goals of affordable housing or whatever your issue is. And so I think just that extra step of explaining why, that's really all you can do. And there's people going to go, well, you're an idiot, and then you're like, well, sorry, like at that point. But I think what I respect is a leader that does that and says that and sticks to that versus one that says that. And then as soon as like 1, 2, 3, 10, 50 people on Facebook say they're an idiot, then they go, oh, they changed their mind, right? Because now it's like, well, now you're just listening to the Facebook comments or whatever, right? So yeah, it is idealistic in that they're not going to thank you for it, but hopefully if you can explain the like why part of it, maybe they'll see an ounce of reality. So.
Thanks.
We're coming up on 8:30. I don't see any more hands raised. I think we could probably tackle half of that. At least I could, but if are there no other questions coming up, maybe we can let Ryan go.
I'm sorry, it's Stephanie, and I have one more thing to say.
Go.
Ryan, I really appreciated that you focused on developing a process. Not everybody's going to be happy, but there should be a process in place that's predictable, that the city, the elected representatives of a city or that they've decided on with input. And I'm going to just refer back to our Petaluma Arts Committee, way back. So there was a process. They had a committee, a commission of volunteers who selected an art project. People lost their minds. They were very unhappy. So they threw it out and they started all over again. They developed another project with another artist. And also people just were really unhappy. That second one was a fine balance. And people are still mad about it like years later. So I think the idea of zoning in advance and putting and identifying the needs of your community in advance, and then welcoming input into the zoning and identifying needs, and then just making a decision is like, that's where you demonstrate that you believe what you believe, that you know what you're saying is backed with evidence and your community support. And then you just have to go with that and just take the heat, So thank you for your input. I appreciate you.
Yeah, no, I think you're right on. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I see Chris's hand popped up one more time.
Yep. So, thank you so much, Ryan. I was not paid for this. Everybody should read your book. I think it's really great. I'm going to get my own copy. I borrowed Dave's, but I'll be referring to it. So if a community such as Petaluma was interested in like really coming up with our brand and going through this, in your experience with people, communities that you work with, what does it take to be successful? I mean, what kind of is it a coalition? What are the different ways that communities come to the place where they go, oh, we ought to do this. We want to do this.
Yeah, I mean, you said the word coalition, and I think that's the answer. I think communities don't always know that they need that, but it can't be just the city government. Because if you think about who's telling the story and identity of a city, there's the city government, the visit, economic development, downtown groups, realtors, chamber of commerce, neighborhoods, groups like this, if they're all telling the story of the community, but in 50 different ways, it takes all of them coming together. Now, one of those groups, the city or any of those groups, can spearhead the initiative, but it has to involve all of them. And I think, sometimes communities, they get that and they see the value in it and they put out an RFP and they do that project. For communities that don't, I think it starts with things like this, like a conversation about, man, I see the value of this. I see the need for this. Have multiple people talking about it. The next step can be a workshop that gets the leaders of those different entities that I just rattled off in a room and recognizing that. And I think one of the most powerful ones is like when you get some of the non-civic entities in that room, you get a university, large employers, a school district, hospital leaders, and they start to see how their goals are either capped or elevated by the identity of a community. All of a sudden, they've become very financially interested in making that a reality. And so now it's not just the city having to do this project, it's the city with the 3 largest employers, the hospital, the school district, the chamber, doing a project together. And so that's tough to get all those people in a room, but that should be the goal with any general plan, community building plan. Those players should all be involved in talking about it.
And Veronica, perhaps you can be our last question.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for listening. I know it's the last minute, but I just have been listening tonight and it occurred to me, we have so much, we've come so far. We have our blueprint, we've got our general plan vision, and maybe the next step is for us to embark on this vision for what our brand is about, including our economic development relating to the other 2 pieces. So that's all I wanted to say, and I'm super excited about the possibility of taking this to the next step.
Excellent.
Okay, that was a great place to end. Ryan, we probably kept you longer than maybe we intended to, but I think this has been a marvelous evening. Thoroughly appreciate your willingness to engage with us. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time and attention and questions. So and for your passion for your community. I mean, that's where it starts. Like if there's not a group of people that are interested enough to like sit on a Zoom and talk about city stuff, there's a lot of other things you could be doing. So I appreciate that. So.
And if anybody wants to continue the conversation over lunch tomorrow, noon, Alquist, hope to see you there. Thanks again.
Bye, all.